had the great privilege and pleasure of being in Africa more than once and more than twice. And of course, it has been my great pleasure to be in your country, in various parts of your country as well. And the memory is very, very warm. That's very, very warm indeed. So, welcome indeed.
Thank you.
Okay, now if we're all in place, I think we can begin. The name of the theme that we will address today is the strategies of development. We're going to look at, in a general way, at strategies of development. What we're going to do is this. We're going to, first of all, I will introduce the subject in a very general way. We will look at some approaches to development, those that we can look at favorably, those that we can look at perhaps more critically. And then in the afternoon, I would like to present to you for your consideration and for further discussion an approach to a generalized strategy of development, which I think would be effective in helping us all to move development forward. Now, by way of introduction, my introduction will be very brief, but there is one word of introduction which I really must put before you, and that is, I might say, a zoological comment. The zoological comment is as follows: I am a coelacanth. Coelacanth. Now you will ask, what is a coelacanth? And I will answer, a coelacanth is a fish. And what is peculiar about this fish? The peculiar thing about the coelacanth fish is this. According to the theory of evolution, the coelacanth fish became extinct 60 million years ago. But that isn't the end of the story, because just 25 years ago, they fished up 3 live coelacanths, live, off the coast of East Africa, as a matter of fact. So why am I a coelacanth? You may notice that I am speaking to you directly. I am not speaking to you by means of a teleprompter. I'm not speaking to you by means of a PowerPoint. I'm not speaking to you even by means of a slide projector. I'm speaking to you directly, human being to human being. And this proves, of course, that I belong to a species which has become extinct. Which has become extinct. Now, the reason I do this is not because I am entirely unacquainted with the wonders of modern technology, and even if I were, I'm very lucky that I have many children and grandchildren. When you get to my age, when you pass the 80 mark, you have many children and grandchildren, and I am carefully instructed by my grandchildren in the wonders of modern technology. So, for example, one of my grandchildren, who's 11 years old, saw me a few weeks ago actually preparing a PowerPoint presentation, and he didn't want to say to me, "Grandpa, what are you doing?" So he very politely said, "Grandpa, I know a way to do it easier." Easier. In any case, the point that I'm making is that despite some surface acquaintanceship with the world of technology, I prefer to talk to people, and I hope they will talk to me, so that you will forgive my coelacanthedness, and we will proceed as the situation would have been in the past. I think that's about the only introductory note that I need make, except to say that please feel entirely free at any time to interrupt not only with questions, but to interrupt with comments or with critique or anything else that you think is important and that you would like to talk about, so that don't feel that because there's a lecture going that it's a one-way stream. Please feel free to turn the stream around. With that much said, let's go and let's begin. It is my belief, it is my strong belief, that the issue which is called development or underdevelopment is the single most important issue on the agenda of the human race in the 21st century. And that is not because I am unaware that other issues exist, but simply because of the weight and impact and significance of this issue. Let me back that statement up with some statistics to give you some insight into what I have in mind. To begin with, the population of the world is now fast approaching, in fact, probably has crossed the 7 billion mark. We are 7 billion human beings on the face of the earth. Of these 7 billion people, according to the United Nations, approximately 1.3 billion people, that is approximately 1/5 of the human race, lives in what the UN defines as poverty. What is poverty in the UN definition? $1.25 a day income. $1.25 a day income. That's poverty, and 1 out of every 6 human beings, almost between 6 and 7 human beings, lives in that kind of poverty. Jeffrey Sachs said that is the poverty which is death, and I think that's true. This is certainly poverty. People living at that level of income do not have decent housing, do not have decent education, do not have decent health, do not have decent work, do not have much hope for themselves, and do not have much hope for their children. And this is not a fraction of the human race. This is, as I say, 20% of the human race. 20% of the human race. Within that group, there is a subgroup that lives what the UN calls deep poverty. By the way, these statistics are from 2006 to 7 to 8 to 9. They're not in the distant past, they're now. We're talking about now. Within that 20%, there is a proportion that lives at what is called deep poverty. Deep poverty, people have under $1 a day income. And of the 300 million people living at $1.25, of that group, almost 700 million live in deep poverty, under $1 a day. Approximately three-quarters of the human race, I'll go further, 50% of the human race lives under $2.50 a day. Under $2.50 a day, 50% of the human race. And about three-quarters of the human race lives under $10 a day. So from that point of view, certainly the facts about development, the challenge of development is very, very great. There are immense gaps at the level of consumption of the people in different countries and within countries in terms of those who are living at a high level of development and those who are not. First of all, to give you a very general statistic, we talk about approximately 60% of the human race lives in developing countries. Approximately 25% of the human race lives in countries between developing countries and industrialized countries. Approximately 15% of the human race lives in industrialized countries. The numbers are rough because the transition from developing to industrialized is going on, and all is going on all the time. Looking at gaps, let me just give you a few figures. The top 20% of the human race, they have 77% of the consumption. 20%, 77% of the consumption. The middle 60% of the human race, they have 22%. 22% of the consumption, a little bit under. The bottom 20% has 1.5% of the consumption of the human race. So if you live in the top 20%, you have over three-quarters. If you live in the bottom 20%, you have under 2% of the consumption. Let's look at a few other statistics. I won't bother you with much. In the industrialized countries, one of the major health problems is obesity. People weigh too much. In the modern world, approximately 12% of the human race, 1 out of every 8 people, is hungry, does not have enough to eat. And this problem is very much compounded by the fact that there is no objective reason in the present time for anyone to be hungry. What does that mean? We are able, scientifically, technologically, agrotechnically, to supply enough food for every human being who is alive today. We do not supply 1 out of every 8 people with enough to eat. And that's a fact today, and that doesn't take into account periodic famines and so on, droughts, floods, and so forth. If we look at sanitation, if we look at sanitation, we discover that 1 out of every 3 people in the world, 1 out of every 3 people in the world has no sanitation in their house. Has no sanitation in their house. We talk about the modern internet age, and I should be speaking about that, and it's true, but for internet you need something called electricity, and 1 out of every 4 human beings has no electricity. 1 out of every 4 human beings is not connected to electricity, to electrical supply. Some of these may have house supplies. Yeah. 1.8 billion people, 1.8 billion people, almost 2 billion people, have access to clean water within 1 kilometer of their house, but not in their house. Not in their house, or with their dwelling, but within 1 kilometer. 1.8 billion people have no running water in the house. Have no running water in the house. I shan't burden you with very much more statistics, but there are some which I think we really cannot ignore and we really have to deal with. One of the interesting statistics which is important to think about is something called life expectancy. Life expectancy, which means how long you have a chance of living. Life expectancy. Now, first of all, I have to explain that when you talk about life expectancy at 50 or 70 or 80 or whatever, it doesn't mean that everybody is going to live that long. It does mean that 1 more than 50% will live that long. In other words, it's a statistical figure. If we say the life expectancy in a country is 70, it means of all the people born today, 70 years from now, 50.0001% will be with us, and 49.9999% will be in the better world. So this is what we mean when we talk about life expectancy. And I do want to say something which is going to be hard for many of those present here to take, but it is a fact, and that is that almost every place in the world, men live less than women. We claim to be the strong sex. It's not true that women are the strong sex, in this way as in many other ways. And women have a slightly greater life expectancy than gentlemen like us have. So now let us look at some statistics about life expectancy. And the first general statistic which is important to take is that in the industrialized countries, life expectancy today is 76. 76. In the developing countries today, life expectancy is 61, taken as a whole. This means that there is a 15-year gap in life expectancy between industrialized countries and developing countries. However, if we look at the figures a little more closely, we get even harder numbers, which I think we have no choice but to look at, and let me share them with you. There are 56 countries in the world in which life expectancy is over 75 now. If you are lucky enough to be born a female baby in Japan today, a little girl born today in Japan, she has a life expectancy of 85.2. 85.2, that's pretty good. So there are 56 countries with life expectancy over 75, and there are 15 countries with life expectancy over 80. That's not bad. However, there are 27 countries with life expectancy under 50. 50 and under. 27 countries. There are, of those 27 countries, 15 countries have a life expectancy of 45 or under. And of those 15 countries, 5 have a life expectancy of 40 or under. So if you are born in one of those countries, you have less than half the life expectancy of our Japanese baby. Infant mortality, and we'll look at just 2 or 3 more figures. I really won't burden you with many more. Infant mortality. Infant mortality is the way it's calculated is how many children out of 1,000 children born alive. In other words, infant mortality does not measure children not born alive. It starts with children born alive. Of every 1,000 children born alive, how many will be alive at the age, how many will die before the age of 1? That's infant mortality. Now, in high-income countries, 6 of those children will die. 6 of those children will die before the year is out. There are some countries in which less than 4 will die. In upper middle-income countries, 22 of those children will die. In lower middle-income countries, 27 of those children will die. In low-income countries, 73 of those children will die. 12 times as many as those in the high-income country. And there are about 10 countries, it varies, of course, from year to year, in which infant mortality is over 100, which means 1 out of every 10 children born alive is dead before the year is over. I'll burden you with only 1 or 2 further statistics. Maternal mortality, women dying in childbirth. This once upon a time was a terrible, terrible plague, and many, many women died in childbirth. Today, fortunately, we have made very great improvements. And you measure maternal mortality by asking how many women die for every 100,000 births. Not 1,000, but 100,000. For every 100,000 births, how many women die in childbirth? Well, in the industrialized and the high-income countries, 9 out of 100,000 women die in childbirth. In the upper middle-income countries, 91 out of every 100,000 women die in childbirth. In the lower middle-income countries, 180 women die out of every 100,000. In the low-income countries, 650 women out of every 100,000 die in childbirth. That is 70 times more than in the high-income countries. 70 times more. So I will just burden you with 1 or 2 more statistics. Just a few statistics about children. First of all, this is a number I'll come back to again and again, but every day in our modern industrialized, commercialized, globalized world, every day there are $1 trillion worth of transactions, currency exchange, and a stock market exchange. Every day, more than $1 trillion. $1 trillion is a very big number. We don't think it's such a number. By the way, I found a very good way to say how much a billion is more than a million. You know, we talk about billions and millions as if it were pretty much the same thing. But I'll give you a key to understanding how big is the difference. 1 million seconds are 11.5 days. 1 billion seconds are 32 years. So 1 million seconds are 11.5 days. 1 billion are 32 years. It's 1,000 times greater. Yeah? 1 trillion is 1,000 billion. So every day there's 1,000 billion dollars worth of transactions, currency exchange, stock exchange. Every day, the same 24 hours, 26,000 children under the age of 10 die of diseases related to bad water and malnutrition. So every day, $1 trillion worth of currency and stock market exchange. Every day, 26,000 children are dead of diseases that come from bad water or not enough food. We have made immense progress in literacy in the world. Immense progress. if you look back 30, 40, 50 years, as I do, immense progress. Nonetheless, the fact remains that today, as we sit here talking, 1 out of every 9 people on the face of the earth, let's say 1 out of 10, we've made a little more progress, somewhere between 9 and 10% of the population are illiterate. When we say illiterate, we don't mean that he can't read a book of philosophy and she can't read a book of physics. We mean he can't sign his name and she can't read a street sign. And that's more than 1 out of every 10 people who are alive today. There are 120 million children, it is estimated, who are presently alive, who will never see the inside of a school, even for one day. 120 million children who are alive, who are here with us, right? Just as we are here. Final statistic, and then I won't trouble you anymore. If you live in a house, which has a roof, a built roof, slate or concrete or wood, but a roof, not thatch, a roof. And in your house you have a bed, you have a closet, you have a toilet, which means you have running water, and you have a refrigerator, which means you have electricity. But just these 4 things: a bed, a closet, a toilet, obviously a sink also, but a toilet, and a refrigerator. You are better off than 70% of the human race. 70% of the human race. A house with a roof, a built roof. A toilet inside the house, toilet, shower, whatever. Running water, obviously. Electricity, and the refrigerator. Somewhere between 2/3, a little more of the human race doesn't have all of that. And we're talking 2000, the 21st century. We're not talking the 15th century. Okay, so I think it's clear why I say that development is not one of the great problems, the great problem on the agenda of the human race for the 21st century. Am I clear?
Yes.
Well, now we come to the next question, which is an important question, and that is, what is development? Or what is underdevelopment? Now, there are many, many definitions, and I will share with you mine, and of course, you don't have to accept it, but it's the one I use, and I think it's useful. When we talk about development, in my opinion, development is the increased and continual satisfaction of the basic needs of the people. The increasing and the continually increasing satisfaction of the basic needs of the people. That, in my opinion, is development. So you will say to me, what are the basic needs of the people? And I respond, in my view, the basic needs of the people are as follows: food and clothing and shelter, health, education, welfare care for the people who have handicapped or aged or so forth, welfare, employment, decent work with decent pay, personal security in one's body, in one's person, that's human rights, in one's property and so forth, personal security, culture, freedom. Human freedom and democracy. These are the basic needs of the people. Food, clothing, shelter, health, education, welfare, employment, security, culture, freedom. And development is the continually increased satisfaction of these basic needs of the people. Now, suddenly you will say to me, wait a minute, isn't development getting more milk from the cow and more liters of milk per day? Isn't development getting more wheat from every acre that you plow and seed? Isn't development building more roads and railroads? Isn't development increasing the production of sulfuric acid, which is so vital for many industrial processes? My answer is no. These are the tools that make development possible. These are the means by which development is possible. Sure, you need more milk from the cow. Sure, you need more roads. But that's not development. Development is when that is translated into the continually increased satisfaction of the basic needs of the people. Now, the other word that's very important in this definition is the word people. There's no country in the world without development. None. And I have been in many, many, many countries. The big question is for whom? And in some countries, there is a very narrow slice of the population that enjoys the benefits of development. So my test is not, is somebody doing well? My test is, are the people doing well? Are the people doing well? So it's true, as I said, there is no country in the world without development, but there are many countries in the world in which development is limited to a segment of the population. By the way, I say parenthetically for another discussion at another time, in many industrialized countries, there's a sector of the population that lives in underdevelopment. A sector of the population. Sometimes it's a smaller sector, sometimes a larger. So the difference is whether it's the majority, the minority, or so on and so on. But the fact of the matter is, the tests that I apply are the basic needs of the people continually being satisfied in increased measure or not. And if not, it's not development. As I say, liters of milk, tons of wheat per hectare, sulfuric acid production, railroad mileage, critical factors, and many more. But that's not development. That's the tools that make development possible. And sure, you need more of all of them and many other things as well. But the fact that you have increased your sulfuric acid production is not yet proof that you're moving forward in what I consider to be development. Am I clear so far? Now I have to be a little more accurate and say, when I speak of development, I am speaking of something I call sustainable human development. It's a long phrase, but not everything can be said on the Twitter. You see, that's why I'm a co-account. I do not believe that everything can be said in 140 symbols. No. Some things take a little longer. Neither Moses nor Jesus spoke on the Twitter. I'd hate to see the Sermon on the Mount on the Twitter. In any case, where was I? Let me go back. Yes, sustainable human development. Human, when I say human development, that means the focus is on the increased satisfaction of the basic needs of the people. That's what the word human means in that definition. It means not measured by economic advance or social advance alone, not measured by technical advance or technological advance, measured by how much that is translated into increased satisfaction of the basic needs of the people. Now, the word sustainable I use in that definition in a double sense. One sense, sustainable is what we now call ecologically sustainable. We now know, we should have known a long time ago, but we now know that we have only one planet, and we can destroy that planet and make it impossible for our children or our grandchildren to live on that planet effectively. All the natural resources we have, all of them, almost without exception, are finite. They're going to run out sooner or later. And when you say, oh, we've got enough petroleum for the next 200 years, well, that's nice. I expect that some of my great-great-grandchildren will be walking around 300 years from now. Will they have petroleum? We can say there's a problem if you say how much fertilizer and how much pesticide should you use in your agricultural production. Well, if you're looking at the short term, the answer is as much as you can. I mean, as much as you can load on, because the more you use both pesticide and fertilizer, generally speaking, the higher your yield will be, or more of your yield will survive. That's very good, but if you do that with no consideration for poisoning the soil, You've done well, and your children will starve. You've done well, but 3 crops, 4 crops from now, the soil will no longer yield, or will yield much less. So it's got to be ecologically sustainable. We've got to think about how to keep this planet alive. We haven't got any other planet. And this is a very, very critical thing. I also use the word sustainable in another sense, which has to do not with ecology, not with the climate, but with society and history. I believe development also has to be historically sustainable. And here I want to say something. I want to talk about this at great length, but time doesn't permit. There is a question of whether you can have rapid development under dictatorship, without democracy. Without democracy. And the answer is, I'm jumping ahead, I say the answer is, it's clearly a matter for discussion. The answer is yes, but you can jumpstart development under dictatorship, but if the dictatorship goes on, the development stops. Long range, more than short range, there is a basic link between democracy and development. The involvement of the people in development, I shall be talking about this as we go on with the discussion of development, the involvement of the people in development and the creation of a democratic framework in which development takes place is critical for development, in my view. So I know that you can jumpstart development, you can get a short lurch forward in development even without democracy. But sustainable? No. Historically sustainable development has to exist in a democratic framework in which the people are a participating body. The people as such. And many times we hear from various leaders internationally or sometimes even nationally, do what I tell you and you will be happy. I think that most of the time what they really mean is do what I tell you and I will be happy. Which is a slightly different phrase. No, do what I tell you and you will be happy, maybe in the short run. In the long run, only what we tell ourselves will make us happy. So I believe that sustainable has a double meaning. Sustainable in terms of ecologically sustainable, and sustainable in terms of, let's call it historically sustainable, i.e. linking development to democracy, to the mass participation of the people in the democratic process. Am I clear? Yeah. So when I speak of development, I am speaking of, as I say, I'm speaking of sustainable human development. And that's the issue that we have to ask ourselves, how we can move forward towards a sustainable human development. Now, I want to be very quick and discuss with you a few background conditions. I hope that time is always the enemy. You know, there's never enough time. And so I am always running after the clock, but I will try to get as much in as I possibly can. I want to say a little bit about background conditions in the 21st century in the world in which we live, because I think that we have to take these into consideration when we think about development. And I want to speak about 3 or 4. I shall do this very, very briefly. I apologize for the brevity, but I have no choice. There are things are going on in our world which are important for thinking about development, and I'm going to discuss a few of them. Some of these things are paradoxical things. Let me define paradox in the sense that I use it. Paradox is when you look at something and at the same time, 2 opposite things are happening about that something. I mean, it's paradoxical to say, let's go up and down at the same time. But I will be discussing with you 2 or 3 background conditions in the world in which are really paradoxical. Really paradoxical. Which means that at the same time, we're going in both directions. And sometimes we have to take into account of the fact that we are going in both directions. Sometimes that's positive, by the way, not always negative. Sometimes it's negative. So let me give you 2 or 3 paradoxical background conditions for our life in the 21st century. First paradoxical background condition I've already mentioned, but I do want to say a word about it again, is the paradox of wealth and poverty. Wealth and poverty. The paradox here is this. Wealth grows, wealth in the broad sense, wealth which includes not only physical wealth, that is to say, physical goods, but also scientific knowledge and technology that make possible the production of more and more items of wealth. Wealth is continually growing, and never so fast as in the 21st century. I should say a little bit about that further on, but take it at this point as a donnée, as a given. Wealth grows untrammeled, and scientific knowledge grows explosively. So that we have wealth growing on a continually rising scale, and yet we have the continuing existence of significant poverty. We've discussed that at great length in the world. For most of the issues I discussed, there is enough wealth in the world to answer them. I said before, we can feed every human being. Once upon a time we couldn't, because sometimes there were floods, and sometimes there were droughts, and sometimes they were attacked by pests and so on, and there wasn't enough food. No question about enough food. In many countries, many industrialized countries, have oversupply of food production. All of Western Europe and the United States pays farmers not to grow food. Why? Because the government guarantees the prices and buys the surplus food. And the government figures it's cheaper, and they're right, to give the farmer the money not to grow it than to have to buy it and store it and pay the farmer for it. So they pay him for not to. Or the government guarantees the production, the oversupply of production of food. There are many statistics, I won't burden you, but just one that I think is a little bit, well, it sometimes makes your head go round. I don't know if you like wine. Wine is, I think, a good drink. Well, a good drink. I hope I'm not stepping on anybody's religious beliefs or anything of that sort. Please forgive me if I am. But I enjoy a good glass of wine now and again. The European Union, they grow good wine. In Europe, they grow excellent wine, I must say. In many other places too, but also in Europe. And the European Union guarantees the price of wine, buys the surplus wine production from the producers of wine. So how much wine did they buy? Last year, no, that's not last year, it's now 3 years ago, almost 4 years ago, the government, the purchase of wine by the European Union from farmers, surplus wine, which the European Union stored or dumped, was enough to fill 55,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. 55,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So I don't know how good it is to take a bath in wine. That I have never done. But plenty to drink. So, 1 out of every 8 people is hungry. And Europe is paying farmers either to give them wine to store or not to grow it at all. That's a paradox. Because as our ability to produce more and more goods, particularly those vital for human life, not all the goods we produce are vital for human life. We produce a lot of junk, but food and so on. Our ability to that increases, and yet the poverty persists. We are not able to translate that. We are not socially, politically able to translate that technological knowledge into a supply of sufficient food for everybody to get enough to eat. And that is a paradox, because the things are going in opposite directions at the same time. Am I clear? Now I come to another paradox, which is a very, very interesting one in my mind, and if I had 3 days, I'd talk about that at great length. I give it a funny name, but I'll explain. I call it the paradox of centripetality and centrifugality. Now, centripetal force in physics is the force that pulls things together. You know, in physics, things pull together. That's centripetal force. And centrifugal force is the thing that pulls things apart, pushes things apart. So, we have to deal with centripetality and centrifugality, and that is a paradox. And I tell you, what is the paradox? The centripetal part of the paradox is one that we're all very familiar with, and that is that more and more and more we are becoming the global village. We are more and more and more being pulled together. And everything, this is very clear almost in every aspect of our life. And when I want to talk about economics, I always talk about the coffee. I'm drinking a nice cup of coffee. The coffee was not grown in Israel. We can grow coffee here, but it's not economically worthwhile. It was probably grown in many places, in Brazil and Vietnam. Vietnam is now the world's second largest producer of coffee. It's a very interesting development. Maybe it was grown in Kenya. They grow good coffee in Kenya. Maybe in Jamaica, not in Israel. I put in Uganda as well. No question. I've drunk good coffee in Uganda. The sugar is also not from Israel. It's from Cuba, or it's from Fiji, or it's from the Philippines. We don't grow sugar here. Again, too much water. So I'm drinking coffee from Uganda with sugar from Fiji in a cup that's probably made in China. So here you go. I do want to tell you something about drinking coffee. That has nothing to do with the lecture. In every country, in every language in the world, the language is full of words that are relevant to the life of the people who use that language. For example, in countries up north, near the North Pole or so on, there are lots of words for snow, because they have lots of snow, so they need to distinguish between different kinds of... People who live in the desert, in the Sahel, other deserts, they have lots of word for sand, because they have lots of different kinds of sand. Sand is important to them. Now, in the Russian language, which is a very lovely language, I think, well, all languages are lovely, but Russian is also a lovely language, they have many words for drinking tea. They are great tea drinkers, the Russians. And they have many words. So they have different verbs for drinking tea. So if you drink tea without sugar, that's one word. If you drink tea with sugar in the cup, stirred, like most of us drink, I guess, that's another word. If you drink tea in the Russian style, which is to put a cube of sugar between your teeth and drink the tea through the cube of sugar, that's a third word. But what do you do if you're very poor? Well, in Russian there is a word for poor people drinking tea, and what it is you tie a cube of sugar on a string and hang it in the middle of the room, and you look at it while you drink your tea. Now, why do I tell you this now? Because I hope you're enjoying your coffee. I'm drinking the coffee, and you have the opportunity, like the Russian tea drinker, looking at the cube of sugar. But anyway, back to more serious matters. There is certainly no question that economically we are becoming the global village, and this is true every day. One could go into a long discussion, and one should go into a long discussion, but not now. Certainly we are becoming the global village financially and commercially. We talked about the $1 trillion a day flow of currency and stock exchange money all around the world. This goes on 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year. So no stop in the flow of money. We are also very much the global village in terms of transportation. It is now possible to get from one place to another place anywhere in the world in less than 24 hours. Probably less than 20 hours. You need different kinds of equipment, but there is no place that is more than 20 hours away from any other place on the face of the globe. So we're becoming. In communications, we are certainly one. We look at the television and we see things that are happening not only 10 or 15,000 miles away or kilometers away. We see them at the same time like the people who are right there are seeing them. In other words, the communication is instant. Of course, the most universal, the most incredible aspect of the global village is, of course, what we call the Internet. And the Internet does two things which are unbelievable in my opinion. And certainly I can say unbelievable because when I was your age or a little bit younger, neither of them existed. The Internet gives us entry to the knowledge, each one of us, to much, and in some cases almost all the knowledge available to the human race. I can sit in front of my computer in my home or here, and I can tap, if I know how, it's available to me, at least 80% of all the knowledge available to the human race anywhere in the world. It's incredible, it's unbelievable, but it's a fact. And of course, the Internet allows us communication with each other at a level that is unbelievable. We can see each other while we speak. We can speak to each other through different kinds of complex devices. We can speak to each other, and we can speak to each other, but we can also speak to 50 of us at the same time in 50 different places. Communications is certainly the global village. And communications is also the global village in another sense. If you know how to dance to a certain kind of music, you can probably dance to that music anywhere in the world, because that music is being played in most, if not all, different corners of the world. So if you know how to dance to that kind of music, then you can pretty well figure you'll be able to dance no matter where you find yourself. When we talk about a certain figure called Madonna, some people think that we're talking about the person defined by the Christian religion as the mother of God. But some people think we're talking about a pop singer in America. And I have a feeling that more people think the second than think the first. So even that kind of culture is becoming the global village. So we are a centripetal world. We're coming together. Right? Yes, but there is also at the same time a very powerful centrifugal force growing in strength in the world. And that is what I call the search for identity. Everywhere in the world, people are looking for their national, their cultural, their religious, their ethnic, their linguistic identity. Who am I? What am I? Now you take the European Union. European Union is a wonderful thing. 27 countries come together in the European continent, which has spent the last 300 years, they've spent the last 300 years killing each other in the tens and hundreds of millions, and they form one community, and most of them have one currency, and free flow of money, free flow of labor. Very good. 27 countries. And they have the European Commission, which is their governmental institution that carries out their policies, their administration. Their bureaucracy is called the European Commission. And you know what they spend 20% of the budget of the European Commission on? 20%, 19.5. You know what they spend it on? Translations. Because these 27 countries speak 18 languages. And nobody is giving up on their language. There are 2.5 million Estonians. And they teach Estonian in their schools. Sure, they teach English or French, whatever, but they teach Estonian. Their kids learn Estonian. There are 5 million Danes. Their schools are in Danish. There are 8 million Swedes. Their schools are in Swedish. There are 15 million Dutch. Their schools are in Dutch. And why not? And why not? I believe the world is richer for the mosaic of cultures, languages, history that make up the human race. Not poorer, richer. But people say, I want to know who I am, to define who I am. One of the most interesting aspects of this, by the way, again, I have no time to go into this, but this would be a subject for a very long discussion, is the question of the place of religion in the history of the 21st century. I would say, again, when I was your age or younger, the general historical theory was that religion was on its way out. No, there were still religious people, and many people believed, and so, but fundamentally, the historians, the philosophers talked about the fact that less and less and less impact of religion on the lives of people. Nobody who was alive today would hold that theory. Everybody agrees, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, that religion has become not a less powerful, but a more powerful factor in the lives in people's lives. And people identify themselves when they say, who am I? What am I? One of the things they use to identify themselves to themselves is where they stand on the different possible religious definitions. So identity, nationality, ethnicity, language, like the European Union, history, religion, all of these are getting stronger, not weaker. I shall say in a minute why I think that is one of the factors that does that pushes that forward. But the fact is that now sometimes this search for identity explodes in violence. We see this, for example, in the former Yugoslavia, when a country called Yugoslavia, which was created, it was an artificial country created after the First World War, and when it split apart on ethnic grounds, on national grounds, sometimes that split was peaceful, but sometimes it was very, very violent. And people died. On the other hand, there was a country called Czechoslovakia, which was also established immediately after the First World War. and they had a peaceful divorce, a friendly divorce. The Czechs said goodbye to the Slovaks, and the Slovaks said goodbye to the Czechs on a friendly basis. Let's be friends, but we're not married anymore. And there is now a Slovak Republic and a Czech Republic. And they agreed, both of them agreed, that while we like each other and we appreciate each other, excuse me, I want to be the Czech Republic. Excuse me, I want to be the Slovak Republic. And that's what we have today, Czech Republic and Slovak Republic. I got a letter a little while ago, a few months ago, from, not a letter, a person whom I don't know, but whom I know of, a woman sent me an article because she thought I would be interested in the article, and she was right, I was interested in the article. And she sent it to me, and she sent me a letter saying, here it was, and I won't go into the discussion. What I want to tell you about is the first paragraph of the article. The first paragraph of the article is in which, sometimes they do this in articles, the author introduces himself. And she introduced herself, and she said she's so-and-so, and she teaches at this university, and her fields of interest are. And then she writes the last line, I am a citizen of the French nation of Canada, living in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. French nation of Canada? Hold on. French. Now this isn't propaganda. She's telling us, she tells me who she's not telling me, she's telling everybody who reads the article, yeah? What her fields of interest are and where she did her research. It's the little biographical note that in many articles, many times is added on to scientific articles, so you know who you're talking to. Not who you're talking to, who you're reading about. I am a citizen of the French nation of Canada. French nation of Canada. So she doesn't mean she's not a Canadian. She means that inside of Canada, she's part of the French nation. Nation. Identity. Yes, there is a minority in Canada that speaks French, and there's a majority that speaks English. And that minority also is characterized by the fact that it is largely Catholic, whereas the English-speaking majority is largely Protestant. So I am a citizen, writes this woman, of the French nation of Canada. The search for identity goes on at the same time as the global village. So this is real paradox, in two directions at the same time. But if we want to think about development, we cannot avoid thinking about both aspects. Yes, development means building and strengthening and moving forward with the global village. Greater interaction, greater interdependence, greater globalization, and so forth. But also, we must take into account that this development must make it possible for us to answer the need so strongly felt and so strongly expressed for identity, which characterizes many, in fact, almost every part of the world today. In this, I make a parenthetical note here, which I, with great self-control, will not enter into, but I do say that one of the most dramatic and interesting events that has occurred in recent times in this regard is the question of the emergence of South Sudan as an independent nation in Africa. The reason I say this is not because of the problems of South Sudan, which has enough problems, South Sudan, I won't go into that at all, but something else. This is the first revision of the map of Africa. This is the first revision of the map of Africa. And Africa decided a long time ago not to revise the map, not because they thought the map was so excellent. Almost every African country knows that the map, which was drawn by imperialism, of course, is not exactly reflective of the realities or the desires of the people living in the different African countries. Sometimes people who belong to the same ethnic group or nation or whatever you want to call it are split between 2 or 3 countries. And I say this without any prejudice because Africans will decide how they want to live. But you look at the map of Senegal, in my mind, the map of Senegal sums it up in 1 minute. You look at the map of Senegal and suddenly you discover there's a finger in the middle of Senegal called the Gambia. And you look at it once or twice, and you look at the national and tribal and group identities within that map, and you discover that the only difference is that the finger belonged to the British, and the hand around it belonged to the French. But the people living in the finger and the hand Same people. Oh, they now speak two languages, of course, because Senegal is a French-speaking language, essentially, and the Gambia is an English-speaking language. Speaking essentially. More than that, they now have, to a certain extent, separate religions, because, of course, much of the Senegal is Muslim, whereas much of the Gambia is Christian. So from that point of view, but why do I say this in terms of South Sudan? Africa decided for its own excellent reasons not to revise the map of Africa. When the nations of Africa achieved political independence, they decided they will not change the map of Africa. Now has come the first change in the map of Africa. And it is a change welcomed by everybody. By everybody.
In the interest of peace.
Everybody in the world, I think, but certainly everybody in Africa. And in my mind, this is a very interesting development in terms of the thinking of where things will go in Africa, not necessarily tomorrow, but 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from now. What will it be like when your children and your grandchildren turn around and ask themselves, are these the borders we want, or do we want to make further changes in the border, just as what changes were made to establish the Republic of South Sudan? So anyway, I just say, here is an example, close to home, so to speak, in which the issue of centripetality and centrifugality is clearly crystallized in a question. And in terms of South Sudan, and that was a terrible history of civil war. I need not tell you the huge price that the history of South Sudan and Sudan contained, the millions of people who lost their lives in that conflict. But at the end of the day, there is a divorce. It's not the friendly divorce of the Czechs and the Slovaks, but it's a divorce. There is South Sudan, and there is Sudan. Okay, so those are the three paradoxes which I wish to speak about, and I think that all of them are important. And now I want to take 1 minute, yes indeed, to talk very briefly about two other, what I consider to be two other very important background conditions which we have to take into consideration when we are thinking about development. By the way, everybody still here? Yes. Everybody awake? Yes. I tell you experience, I share with you a personal experience which I had. I once, when I was a much younger man, well, I was there many times, but one of the first times that I was ever in India, this is, good God, 40 years ago, more than that, I was invited to lecture at the University of, now it's Mumbai, University of Bombay. And a small university, I asked the rector, how many students? He said 250,000. I mean, it's a pretty big, so I was invited to give a lecture there, and being that it's India and a huge country with huge population, there was a huge room, and there were, I don't know, thousands of people in the room, literally. So I give my lecture, and I'm going along like I go along, and I see that the people are going like this. And they're going like this. So I figured no one's agreeing with me, so I get more passionate. So the more passionate I get, the more they go like this. But I see that I'm not making any progress, and they're going like this. And then I finish the lecture, and of course they applaud, and I go to the rector, very embarrassingly. I said, I'm terribly embarrassed. I mean, India is a country with great culture of politeness, and these people were very polite. They applauded, but clearly they didn't agree with the word I said. And he said, no, you don't understand. In India, this is yes. This is yes. So we think that this is no, but the Indians think that this is yes. So then when they were saying yes, I thought they were saying no. Okay, so now quickly two other things which are very important. One of them is something which I mentioned, but I just wish to mention in passing, and then I'll talk about the other one, and then we'll be finished with these background conditions. One thing is clear about our era, the 21st century, and again, one can see this even in a person's lifetime. It is the explosion of knowledge. The total explosion of knowledge. It is estimated that of all the scientific papers ever written in the history of the human race, 70% have been written in the last 30 years. 70% have been written in the last 30 years. And it is estimated that the next 70% will be written in the next 25 years. Which means that the sheer amount of knowledge is unbelievable. You can go to the library and you can get a book which is called A Guide to the Periodical Literature in the Biological Sciences. And it's a book of 600-700 pages, and on every page is a list of publications. 1 line, 2 line per publication, yeah. And on each page there are 40 or 50 of them. This is a list of the journals that deal with biological science. It's got several tens of thousands of entries. And this is not the journal. It's the name of the journal. The journal comes out once a year, twice a year, 3 times a year, 12 times a year, 52 times a year. And that's just the biological sciences. Just the biological sciences. The explosion of knowledge is an incredible, unbelievable burst of human creativity, human ingenuity. This burst of knowledge is really not only abstract knowledge or theoretical knowledge, but very practical knowledge. Huge jumps forward in technology, huge jumps forward in the invention of machines and tools. We live in an age of the explosion of knowledge. And we live in the age of the internet, which I've already mentioned, the World Wide Web, whatever you call it, we'll call it, whereby that knowledge is more and more and more generally available. Generally available. So the tools that humanity has to shape its future are growing at an unprecedented pace. And what took 100 years, let's say 500 years ago, took 100 years, now sometimes takes 100 days. And the point about this is that the pace is growing faster. It's not only faster than it was, it's getting faster all the time. Of course, knowledge feeds knowledge. That's also a thing. And we have this magnificent tool of the internet, which makes the exchange of knowledge possible. And that, of course, feeds knowledge. But the fact of the matter is, knowledge is exploding all around us. The tools humanity has to shape its future are growing in an unprecedented rate. And this is a great glory if we know how to use it. If we know how to use it.
In the poor economies, child mortality is very high.
I'm sorry?
Child mortality is very, infant mortality is high.
Yes.
And there's also high fertility levels.
High fertility
levels. Women are producing more children in the poor economies than in the more advanced economies. The controversy I'm seeing is the issue of homosexuality developing more in the developed economies. What impact will this have on development world over in the future?
Well, there is much discussion in the world, and I know there is much discussion in your country, of the issue of homosexuality, which is an issue which has been with us apparently for as long as there is a human race. This is nothing new. This is nothing that belongs to the 21st century. And I will say to you, if you ask my opinion, I'll be happy to tell you, but before that I will say something else. In the Bible there is a very important phrase, which is the just man, the good man, in his truth he will live. In his truth he will live. The only way he can live in his truth if he allows me to live in my truth. So on this issue, as on so many other issues, there are differences of opinion. And I have an opinion, which I'm perfectly happy to share with you. But I think it's very important that all of us accept that in your truth you shall live means I will do, unless you harm me by your truth or I harm you by my truth, then if you are different from me, I may not share your likes and dislikes, but I recognize that you are living in your truth. And this applies, for example, if you believe in this religion, that religion, or third religion. And believe me, every religion believes that it is true. I know of no religion that thinks it's not the truth. I am the way and the truth and the life, said Jesus. And he who believeth on me, he shall live and shall not die. That is absolutely true if you are a Christian. But if you are a Muslim, you have a different truth, which you believe equally. I was told by a Muslim scholar, he said to me, the Quran is not a book about the truth. The Quran is the truth. Which is a very profound thought. It's not a book about the truth. It is the truth. To whom? To the Muslims. And there are 2.25 billion Christians in the world, 2.5 billion, but there are also 1.5 billion Muslims. In your truth, says the good book, ye shall live. Now, I think this applies to almost every issue, but there is one basic thing which applies to everybody. If I agree and you agree that in your truth you will live and in my truth I will live, you have to support my right to live in my truth. And I have to support your right to live in your truth, even though it isn't my truth. I have to say he belongs to that religion, which I think is nonsense, heresy, whatever. But it's his right to believe in that, just as I believe in my religion, which I think is the Word of God. Am I clear?
Yeah.
And this is what I would say also in regard to homosexuality. I'm perfectly prepared to tell you what my opinion is, but I'm not talking about my own personal opinion, which is a different story. I am saying that in your truth you shall live. In your truth you shall live. And the only limitation is ye shall live. So I do not think you can persecute a person. You can't. I do not think you should persecute a person for his belief or her belief, except if his belief or her belief persecutes. In other words, the end of your freedom is my nose, and the end of my freedom is your nose. And you can play the trumpet at 3 o'clock in the morning, except not under my window. And I can play the trumpet at 3 in the morning, except not under your window. And this is my belief about as I say, I'm not taking the issue in itself, but I'm saying that I believe that people have a right to be what they want to be, provided that does not prevent me or another person from being what he or she wants to be. And I say this about religion, and I say this about nationality, and about everything else. I do not ask anyone to be a less fervent believer in his religion. On the contrary, in your faith ye shall live. But I do ask him to grant me the same privilege. To grant me the exact same privilege of living in my faith. Now, how should I say? I think this applies very much across the board, and I think that I say this. Actually, I should say that I say this as a good family man. We are very fortunate. My wife and I. First of all, my wife and I have celebrated our 60th wedding anniversary. So, if you want to see a woman who has lived through much suffering, the woman who was married to me for 60 years, that's a woman of great strength. Great strength. But also, we have a very carefully planned family. We have, you can't plan better than we did. We got 2 boys and 2 girls. You can't do that. We have one of each and one of each. So, what I'm saying is that where I stand in this particular matter, and my own lifestyle is one question. But another question is something. And I do want to say a word about something else, not homosexuality, but something which is related. I'll do this very briefly. One of the great, when we discuss development, is one of the great arguments that you hear sometimes, particularly in industrialized countries, is you hear. So again, my response is that this is an issue in which I think it belongs to an individual decision. And insofar as individuals make that decision, I may not share that decision. In fact, I don't, but I do not think that I have the right to say to him or her, you must do what I do because I believe it is right. Just as I say, I do not think I have the right to say to anybody, you must believe in my religion because I think it's right. No matter how strongly I think my religion is right, you have a right to think the same thing for your religion. And I have no right to take away from you that belief, no matter how much I might think that theologically I'm right and you're wrong. No right. And you have no right to take away from me, no matter how strongly you might feel that theologically you're religious. Anyway, but I want to say a word about another problem.
was really touching on the question of economic impact, impact on development more than the social and the ethical issues of the.
I don't think that homosexuality has any impact on development. There is no evidence that I know of that shows that in countries in which there is more homosexuality, or by the way, nobody really knows how much homosexuality there is. The statistical figures are very, very different. The range of statistical figures is very different, and the reason for that is, of course, that in many countries it's very dangerous to admit that you're a homosexual. There are penalties for being homosexual. I don't think that there's any statistical evidence linking homosexuality to development either favorably or unfavorably. I mean, many things happen that are related to development, but other things happen. Just as I think there's no difference in countries, let's say, I don't know, what percentage of the people are bald. Forgive me, I have a little bit of hair, but I don't think there's any relationship between development and what percentage of the population is bald. It happens in some countries, more people have hair, more gentlemen, ladies generally have hair, but more gentlemen are bald. In some countries, less gentlemen. And it's an interesting thing, but it's got nothing to do with development. It's got nothing to do with development. There is one subject in this area. I'll take a minute. I'm sorry to say, I'm going to run out of time. We'll be here next year, but there is one subject which is not related to homosexuality, but related to an issue that has to do with personal life, and that's this. Sometimes you hear people who say countries that are underdeveloped are poor because they have too many children. And the population grows. If those people only didn't have so many children, there would be no problem. Now that is a very serious and very mistaken, in my view, position to take. And I want to turn it around and tell you that in my view, again, everything that I say my view means you don't have to agree with me. You can or not. In my view, it's the other way around. In countries where the population growth is very, very fast, it's not that the people are poor because they have too many children. It's that people have many children because they are poor. It's the other way around. And I can also give statistical evidence. First of all, you have to remember that when people are desperately poor, remember the people living under $1.25 a day. For those people, more children is more income. A marginal increase in income. And sometimes it is a marginal increase in income that is the difference between life and death, or very close to that. Secondly, at a more fundamental level, one thing is clear. If you have no hope for your children's future, you have no reason to think about how big your family should be. On the contrary, the more the merrier. When does every country, every civilization, this is one of the few things that happens everywhere. When do people start thinking about what is the best size for a family? When they have hope for their children's future. And let me put it even more bluntly. We have statistical evidence which proves that that every time you do two things, at least one of the two, and preferably both, but one is enough, two is sure, you will get a drop in population growth. What do you have to do? One, increase the standard of living of the poorest people in the country. Increase their income. Number two, give girls secondary education, high school. Do those two things and the population goes like that. Population growth goes like that. And this is true, colleagues, everywhere in the world. Every culture, every religion. I can bring you examples without end. Without end. In other words, people everywhere, and I repeat, everywhere in the world, when their life situation changes, they begin to think differently about many things, and one of the things they think differently about is, how many children should we have? How many children should we have? And this, I can give you the statistics. It's very peculiar, it's very strange, but I can give you the statistics. I'll give you 3 statistical examples just so you will see how this truth holds up. We have a neighboring country called Lebanon. It's a neighbor of Israel. And Lebanon is a very interesting country because in Lebanon, for many, many reasons, but in Lebanon there are 4 different subgroups. All the Lebanese are Arabs, the great majority of Lebanese are Arabs. But in the Arab community of the Lebanon, there are 4 different subgroups. And these subgroups are different in religion and in ethnicity to a certain extent, but above all, they're different in standard of living. The 4 groups are Christians, Maronite Christians. The second group are Sunni Muslims. The third group are Shia Muslims. And the 4th group are Druze. The Druze is a split off from Islam in the 11th century, which exists in the Middle East. There are about 7-8 million Druze in the Middle East, including in this country, in Israel. But in Lebanon, there is a very large Druze community. So it's a different religion, but related to Islam. All these people are Arabs. All these people are Arab-speaking. Now, for various historical reasons, which I will not go into, the Christians are the richest. The Sunni Arabs are the second. The Druze are the third, and the poorest are the Shia Muslims. The Shia Muslims are the largest group, numerically. The biggest single group are Shia Muslims. Now, you look at this country and you see an incredible thing. The birth rate of the different populations. Now, in measuring birth rate, we have a thing called the net reproduction rate, which measures how fast a population is growing. What is the net reproduction rate, NRR? It is the number of children in the country or in the group per woman in the ages of 15 to 45. So if you take the female population, I'm sorry, gentlemen, I know we have a role to play, but in this case, they don't take us into consideration. You take the female population between 15 and 45, which are the general limits of childbearing age, and you see how many children each woman has in the general population. Yeah, you make a statistical calculation. To keep the population stable, you need 2.2. Why? Because while every child has 2 parents and so on, you need a little more than 2 to keep the population stable, because some children don't reach maturity, and some children who are born reach maturity but never marry, or some children who reach maturity and marry never have children. So if you want to keep the population stable, you need for every woman in the age of fertility 2.2 children, okay? That's stability. Less than 2.2, population is going down. More than 2.2, population is going up. Now, by the way, there are very interesting things. In Japan, for example, it's 1.6. 1.6. In most of Europe, it's under 2.2. In Russia, it's under 2. Whereas in some countries, it's 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, look at the Lebanese, and you find an interesting thing. The NRR of the Christian population is like Europe, slightly under or at the level of stability. The NRR of the Sunni Muslim population, which is slightly less wealthy, somewhat less wealthy than the Christian population, is a little bit higher. The NRR of the Druze is a little bit higher than that. And the NRR of the Shia is the highest of all. What is interesting is that all these different religions have different attitudes towards family planning. But the Christian population, their religion is strongest against family planning. It's Catholic. Maronites are Catholics. And yet they have the lowest NRR. The lowest NRR. Has to do not with religion. Has to do with social economic realities. Social economic realities. Give you one more example. 1950, the NRR in Nigeria and in Korea, 2 countries, was about 6.2. They were the highest, close to the highest in the world. Korea underwent a huge developmental, I don't go into the whole history. In 2000, I think, I have to check the exact date, something around 2000, the NRR in Korea had gone down to about 2.4, 2.3. The NRR in Nigeria was the same as it was 50 years before. The difference, the change in the standard of living of the masses of the people. Now, giving women education, which is a very important thing in itself, giving women education is not connected with family planning. You don't need to go to high school to know about family planning. It has to do with the role of the woman in the family. Women with more education play a more dynamic, central role in the life of the family. And this is transcultural. Transcultural. And therefore, when women get secondary education, that leads to a change in their situation, their view of themselves in their family, their view of their children, and inevitably results in a reduction in the NRR. Now, I think children are a great joy, and I think people should have children. And whatever you do in that respect, you can't catch me, because I know no greater joy than the joy of children. There is grandchildren, but you'll get to that. You'll get to that. However, if you're looking at a situation in which you want to say people are poor because they have too many children, I say nonsense. Nonsense. The existence of too many children is a proof that you're looking at a poor society, an underdeveloped society. Give this society the tools of development, and that issue will vanish off the stage. Vanish. And one more example, an amazing example, but I can't go into it now. The Chinese, of course, had this problem China is the biggest country in the world, and they put into effect the one-child policy. They had a policy for the past 40 years in which does not permit any family to have more than one child. And in fact, they carried out this policy with sometimes iron fist. Iron fist. And they kept the population it didn't actually work out to one, but it worked out to population stability. The reason it didn't actually work out to decrease population is because people lived longer and so on, and other factors came into play. What is happening now is China is relaxing the one-child policy, and the population growth is going down. Now, why is that? Everybody knows what has happened to China in the past 25 years in terms of the change in its economic structure, its place in the world economy, and the standard of living of the Chinese people. So you change that, and suddenly what they had to put into place with an iron fist is becoming not people's choice. One child, two child. It's beginning to be that kind of a situation. 3 children, 2 children, 1 child. That kind of a situation. So what I'm saying is that people who say to poor countries, and you are poor because you have too many children, I say to them, nonsense. The existence of a population problem is usually an expression of the situation of poverty, or the extent of to which poverty is part of the life experience of these people, whether it be in India, or whether it be in China, or whether it be in Africa, or whether it be in Latin America. Change that, and you change that. Okay, I'm sorry, but that's only because you brought me into that field, so I left it from that gate. Now, sorry?
I said, I'm sorry for driving you this far, but really I was driving towards I was thinking whether there was any economic sense towards these issues. And it's good you have told us about the children and the development. What you did tell us is that the PAD also liberated women. The PAD liberated women because they can now go in a meeting and they can go to school, they can go to work, and they have nothing to restrict their movement and activity.
Well, let me just say very simply that I think that when we will discuss the question of development, it seems to me that when you talk about development, I'll talk about this again, but I have to move forward now. I have only a few more minutes. I want to say something which I'll say again later on in the afternoon. It seems to me that we are all very foolish. I look at the gentleman here. If we give up in thinking about development on the contribution which half the human race can make to development. If you say you keep women out of development, who are you punishing? You're punishing development. These are people, human beings, with intelligence and with imagination and with knowledge and with physical strength, and you're saying we don't want you, we can do fine without you. That's crazy. I mean, in my view, that's even from the very basic principle, not even to talk about equality, not even to talk about the fact that all human beings, in my view, are equal. If we had an actual resource that we could use and we said, no, we're not going to use it because we don't like it for one reason, that strikes me as being a very foolish approach to development. The contribution which women can make to development is the same as the contribution that men can make. If our social creation keeps women from making that contribution, not only do they suffer, development suffers, which means all of us suffer. In other words, even if you forget about all the other good reasons for equality, gender equality, from the pure point of view of development, you have a resource which you're not using. And it's available. You don't have to invent it, you don't have to bring it, you don't have to import it, you don't have to pay tax on it. It's there. It's there, it's right there. And it's a resource that's a little better than a machine or anything else. It's a resource of creativity, of imagination, of energy, of strength. And if you say, well, don't get involved, then I think that what you're doing, I'm not saying you, I'm saying anyone who says that is doing is depriving himself of a major resource. There are many other reasons for gender equality, but I think this one is also a very good reason. This is a major human resource. We need all the resources we can get. And this is a major resource. I don't want to say anything, but sometimes I think a better resource than the resource that's handling the business now. But that's a different story. That's a different story. You know about the lions. I need not tell you about the lions. The lady lion, she does all the work. And she not only raises the children, she does the hunting, of course. What does the gentleman do? He plays bakshish, backgammon, and he deals with politics, the male lion, and he roars a lot. But the woman does all the work. All the work, including the hunting. And what he does is kind of march around it, show he's got a big tail and a big, a lot of fur around his neck. But from the point of view, who's doing the work? The lady lion is doing all the work. Now I say nothing, just a little nature story to think about. I go further. Okay, colleagues, I want to move forward if I may. Now, I haven't got much time, but we'll see how we deal with the afternoon. I want to say a few words about approaches to development. This is a subject I had hoped to finish this morning, but I will do as much as I can now, and the rest we'll do in the afternoon. The first thing I want to say about, when I say approaches to development, I want to talk about certain ideas which are relevant to development. Remember, we talked about the background conditions. All these background conditions have to be taken into consideration when you're thinking about development. You can't avoid thinking about them. Remember, when I speak about development, I'm speaking about sustainable human development and all that implies in terms of the way I think about it. Now I want to say a few words about approaches to development. First thing I want to say is I think if you want to think creatively about development, you have to think comprehensively and integratively. I will explain what I have in mind. Most of the time when you read, much of the time when you read about development or hear about development, people are talking about economic development. And economics is certainly an absolute critical element in development, but it's not the whole story. Development is not only economic, development is also social. It has to do with the social aspects of development. And in fact, it is now a pretty well accepted thesis, at least by some or by many, that the best economic investment you can make is a social investment. What does that mean? The best economic investment you can make is in human resource development. In other words, give your human resource, your population, more health, more education, better life conditions. That's the best investment you can make in terms of your development and payoff. And if it's not the best, it's certainly one of the best. So when you want to think about development, you have to think about economics, you have to think about social aspects of development. Then you have to think about cultural aspects of development. You can't divorce development from the culture of a people. And we should be talking about that in the future, in a few minutes. But in my view, it's certainly absolutely clear that you must take the cultural into consideration. Even if we have common goals, the way we get to those common goals may be different because we come from different cultures. We come from different cultures, and there's nothing wrong with that. On the contrary, as you heard me say again and again, I think we are richer for the diversity of cultures that makes up the world we live in. But we have to take them into consideration. Let's say we agree that gender equality is a good thing. You can't get to gender equality in different cultures in the same way. You have to take into consideration what the culture creates. And we all live in a culture. Culture gives us the tools to be who we are. When I say culture, I don't only mean culture in the sense of the theater or music or art. I mean that, but I also mean language. I also mean customs. I also mean what do you eat and what do you not eat and how do you cook. All this is culture. I say culture as civilization. I see culture as civilization. So you have to take into account economics, the social aspect, the cultural aspect. You have to take into account the community aspect, how you build and strengthen communities. You have to take into account the political aspect. I need not tell you the political aspect. You have to take into account something which I consider to be very important. I'm going to talk about this at the end, but I'll say a word about it now. The moral, the ethical aspect. I think it's impossible to think about development without thinking about ethics. In my opinion, a child who dies because he hasn't got clean water, that's an ethical issue, a moral issue. Yes, it's an economic issue. Yes, it's a social issue. Yes, it has to do with other things. It is also an ethical issue. A person who is hungry in a world in which in other parts of the world there's too much food, that's an ethical issue, not only an economic issue. It has a moral dimension. It has to do not only with calculations and statistics. It has to do with right and wrong, with good and bad. So, when you think about development, you have to take into consideration all its many aspects. If you think only about the economics, the cultural can rise up and kick you in the nose. If you think about the social but forget about the economic, you can suddenly find you have wonderful social programs, but no resources to carry them out. No resources to carry them out. So you have to think comprehensively, and you have to think integratively. What is integratively? You have to think about the way these things impact on each other. Not only do you have to take the cultural into consideration and the economic into consideration and the social, you have to ask, how does the cultural impact on the economic? How does the economic impact on the social? How does the social impact on the community aspect of development? How does it work integratively? Integratively. Am I clear?
Yeah.
So my first background or first remark about approaches to development is to say, think about development comprehensively and integratively. I don't deny the significance, the centrality of economics, but I do deny that economics is the beginning and the middle and the end of development. It isn't. It isn't. Development has to be conceived of in a comprehensive and integrative fashion. And because I have, depends how you look at the watch if you turn it around. Mark Twain was an American humorist, and he said many funny things. But one of the things he said was, I do not mind if people look at their watch while I am, he used to give humorous lectures, and he used to say, I don't mind if people look at the watch while I'm lecturing. I get a little upset when they take it off and start shaking it next to their ear to see if it's still working. But I'm looking carefully at the watch. The second thing that I want to say is, I'll say this very briefly, perhaps come back to it later. There is no single model of development which is good for everybody. Development is not one size fits all. Development is not unisex. Development grows up out of the history and the culture and the civilization of each nation, each people, each group of people in the world. Does that mean we can have no common goals about development? Of course not. Not only can we have common goals, we should have common goals. We should define what we want development to be. Does that mean that we cannot share knowledge? Ridiculous. Of course we can share knowledge. We must share knowledge. Otherwise, all of us will begin with the triangular wheel and the square wheel, and then eventually we'll get to the round wheel. But some people know about the round wheel already. So we don't have to go through all that. We just have to get the knowledge that is available. But we have to remember that in translating that knowledge into those goals, we have to go through a process which is going to be different in different cultures, in different countries, in different civilizations. The SAP policy, you know SAP? The policy imposed by the World Bank on developing nations. Structural adjustment programs, absolutely. That was a policy which had many, many weaknesses. I could go into that in detail, but its greatest weakness, in my opinion, was they tried to impose it as it stood in one shot on many, many different countries. They imposed it on 51 countries in Africa. They also imposed it on countries in Asia and Latin America and so forth. Now, even forgetting about Latin America or Asia, 51 countries in Africa are not 51 copies of the same thing. There are many similarities, but there are also many differences. And 51 countries in Africa require 51 programs of development. And anybody who tries to say, here is one size fits all, is imposing, in my view, a position which is incorrect, which also has a little odor of intellectual imperialism, but also doesn't work, doesn't reach to the goals that it should reach to. Now, saying this means that you impose on every nation, on every community, a very great burden. And that is, every nation, every community, every larger community, maybe every regional community, depends, I'm not limiting this, has to develop its own model. Cannot copy your model. It is not that I go somewheres and take somebody else's model, translate it into my language, and go to work. No! I have to build my own model. Now again, does that mean we can't share goals? No, it does not mean that. On the contrary, we should share goals. Does that mean we can't share knowledge? On the contrary, we must share knowledge. We must learn from each other. But it does mean that we can't do it unless we do it ourselves. We have to use that knowledge, go to those shared goals through a path that is best fitted for us and that works for us. And even the best aspects of other people's development experience, which we want to learn from, have to be filtered through the filter of our own reality. Our own reality. There's no other way. So it puts a big burden on the shoulders of each nation or each group, but it's the only way to go. It's the only way to go. So the second aspect of the approach to development, on one hand I said it should be comprehensive and integrative. Now I say no single model. Models to be developed by countries or groups of countries appropriate to their reality, which means their history, their culture, their political, social, economic, community system, whatever it may be. And that must be the basis for the development of the model which works for them best. And yes, then it is the story of my two little daughters. We, as I said, I think I've told you, we had 4 children, the boys at the end and the girls in the middle. And when my daughters were young, you know, they were young children, 5 or 6 or 8, there are only 2 years difference between them. They used to, you know, at holiday season or something, get a new dress. And then they wore a new trousers and jacket or whatever. And they would come to their daddy and say, "Whose is nicest?" And I would always say, "Yours is nicest on you. Yours is nicest on you." And that's the truth. And I say that about development. Yes, indeed, there are shared knowledge and shared goals, but yours is nicest on you, yours is nicest on you, and mine is nicest on me. And that is the way it has to go. So that is the second aspect of the approaches to development. And I suggest that now will be the time to take a break. The hour is almost 1, 2 minutes to 1, and we will reconvene here at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then we will try to finish, but we will run out of time, I guarantee. But in any case, thank you very, very much, and I look forward to seeing you at 1 o'clock. So, good appetite and good lunch.
Okay.
And I shall be back at 3 o'clock. And I did not know that Big Brother was watching me. Everything I said under duress. I deny all of it.